Welcome to Coffee in the Barn, where every cup tells a story. With a rotating lineup of hosts, we invite you to join us as we explore the diverse challenges and triumphs of modern life and the heart of agriculture. From the fields to the classroom, from innovators to everyday visionaries, each episode brings a fresh perspective and a new voice. So brew yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's uncover the stories that shape our lives, our farms, and our communities.
Okay. So my name is Luis, working for a company called Beans Nutrition. We are focusing on the solution providing for one-stop shop for ingredients, particularly for animal nutrition. The core business for our operation is amino acids, which we are able to move tens of thousands metric tons per year, even it's only our second year in this market. On top of that, we are recently introducing tribasic copper chloride as the exclusive dealer for a manufacturer called Jabon. So I suppose this is why we're having this episode with Casey here to discuss, the opportunities, the demand, the market, and the potential opportunities, and of course challenges this market and slash for this particular product.
Well, thank you, Louis, for that quick introduction. And for our listening audience, we're going to be changing it up. You're going to hear another new voice, and that is my awesome graduate student that I brought over on a grant with Dr. Crystal Levesque, finishing up her master's at South Dakota State University in swine nutrition, Aryeri Bardales. And in another few years, we'll be able to call her Dr. as well, but we're still working through that process. So welcome, everybody. And I'll let Aryeri kind of kick off some of the questions as we get in and talk about copper markets and pricing and really how that influences animal nutrition.
Sure.
All right. Hi, it's nice to meet you, everyone, and nice to meet you, Dr. Lewis. It's a pleasure to be here. And well, as Dr. Bradley said, my name is Aryeri. I'm currently master student at SDSU and also work with Dr. Casey Bradley. And I had a lot of questions for you, Dr. Lewis. Hopefully, you can answer all. And can we start? And can you introduce or give us a brief overview in beans nutrition and explain your role in the company?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Beans Nutrition is a very young startup company in America. We registered in year 2021, late 2021. The actual operation kicked off probably early 2022. We have a warehouse in the Midwest and another one on the East Coast. We have a smaller warehouse in Quebec, Canada as well. As I mentioned before, the core business for us is the distribution of amino acids, lysine, threonine, all the other boring stuff. Even it's our second or third year operation-wise in this particular market, but we are not new. We have been doing exactly the same thing for the last 25 years. So our parent company back in China is probably the second largest privately owned distributor for amino acids domestically in China. So that's how we got all these, very close relationships with all the manufacturers, the access to the market firsthand, and obviously the knowledge accumulated, not just for amino acid, but the application, the production aspect, and also the overview for the global market as well.
Awesome.
And just a bit more on the US operation. Our primary warehouse is in Midwest, Illinois. And within that location, we are able to cover, within 500 miles radius, we are able to cover probably 70%, give or take, of the swine farms or swine customers. And in that warehouse, we constantly carry pretty much all the typical amino acids that you would use on the daily farming. But recently, in order to have further expansion for the business, we are engaged with Jabon Bio, which is a very reputable producer for minerals, especially for animal feed grade. So we are becoming the exclusive dealership for Tribasic Copper. But we are also, being a salesman myself, marketing director or manager, whatever you call that. That's my role for Beans Nutrition. Being a marketing person, zero knowledge of the nutrition aspect, which is why we had to engage Casey, who's been very kind to help us on studying the product, analyzing this market, and give us some valuable feedback, both from academic and also commercial aspect as well.
Yeah, and I'm just going to point out a little bit, Lewis. We've talked differently in our conversation, so the audience is, you're well known and well established throughout the world from an amino acid perspective, but because of your warehousing, because of your connections and ability to handle logistics, importation, different aspects of that to get feed ingredients into the U.S. at a cost-effective price point, you can offer the customers when they need maybe just 2 tons of threonine, they have room on that truck to fill in. And so you're diversifying the portfolio, if I understood right. So you're able to provide full truckloads, because we all know that freight today is very costly for any feed ingredient, and it can add upwards, if you're ordering just a single pallet, $400 or $500 or more. And so if you can order a full truckload of product, and that being different products from beans, for instance, that's where the cost savings and the advantage comes into play.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of amino acid, especially lysine and threonine. You got to use it, and it's moving in large volume, and we are selling truckloads by truckloads. But from time to time, but on the other hand, when it comes to minerals, vitamins, or enzyme, phytates, some, I would say, technical product, nobody buys truckloads of them. They still have to send in a truck to pick it up or deliver if you're buying a couple pallets. But if we are able to fill the truck with lysine or threonine, then it offsets the overall cost of the entire truck, not just for the copper or minerals or enzyme, but also for the amino acid as well. So that is our advantage. And on top of that, amino acid is not a commodity per se, but it has a very similar characteristic of commodity. It's reasonable large in volume, and it's constantly consumed. We often refer amino acid as a door knocker for other products. So we want to take advantage of that. That's why we are putting this copper product on the catalog. And moving forward, once this one is working out, we have other resource to further introduce other technical product.
Awesome.
Hopefully I answered the question. I can't even remember what the question was to start with. Sorry.
Don't worry.
Well, you filled in my gaps as well. But I guess the biggest thing to talk about is, obviously we all know copper is a essential nutrient in everybody's diet, regardless if you're a human, pig, chicken, cow. We all need copper to an extent. What drives the cost of copper?
The copper price itself.
Yeah.
So, okay, copper is a commodity, right? So, and it's very volatile as well. When we're talking about copper source for animals, there are typical ones like copper sulfate, copper chloride, and I think someone's using copper carbonate as well from time to time. They are somehow, when we're talking about the costing perspective, they are literally the same thing. They are all, I would say 99, but 90%, 80% correlates with the price of copper. And if you refer the future price for copper, which is widely available on the internet. And the copper price, the copper future market itself is $100 billion industry, and the trading is very active. This is good and bad. From a sales or marketing perspective, right? We know the raw ingredients to make TBCC or copper sulfate or whatever is 80% plus copper, raw copper. And the price, any change of the copper future will pass on to the animal copper resource product, but with a lagging. Say if we have a surge in copper future today, we wouldn't be able to see a surge of a copper sulfate or copper chloride on the same day. I would expect probably 10 days, 7 days, 10-ish. This is quite an advantage from trading perspective. If you are watching the copper future price close enough, you would have at least 7 days heads up. You have a crystal ball which is only working up to 7 days.
But a lot of things that drive copper would probably be new building and market conditions, like if there's higher GDP and things like that.
I can't remember on top of my head, but I think we were sitting at a 10-year high for copper price back in June or May, late May, when we met in Pork Expo. That's probably early June. And shortly after that, it's declined a lot. But even that, we're still sitting at a 5-year high compared to 10-year high. And that copper price has mainly increased since 2022. The major consumer of copper is obviously for electricity. It's very good conductor. So all these machines, electronic appliance we have in the household, they are all somehow consist of copper. But lately, electric cars, that's a major driver for the consumption of copper. So as we are seeing the shifting from gasoline to electrical cars, I would think the copper price would remain very attractive for the foreseeable future. There are obviously other aspects or other reasons for the fluctuation of copper as well. Someone's joking, saying, maybe because of the war, we have 2 wars constantly going on around the globe, and ammunition, that's copper as well.
So a lot of drivers beyond pigs on feed or birds on feed.
Yeah. But again, I'm not an expert in the trading of copper, but this is just based on my very limited knowledge of this industry.
I had a question, Doctor. How the fluctuation in copper can affect the swine or poultry, the feed formulation? How do you know what I mean?
Well, definitely. I understand the question you're asking is, obviously, it's unfortunate we only have a 7-day crystal ball on copper markets, right? But when we look at, we're at the 5-year high still and the 10-year high of copper. And so when I'm evaluating copper as a growth promoter in my finisher rations, and a lot of people tend to pull that in summer conditions because the pigs aren't growing as fast. So we need a little boost. And so when you start formulating on that, it really determines, do I use copper as a growth promoter? And that every system will be dependent, right? And understanding that key value that it has, and that, I have to take it into account. What am I getting paid on the shackle? What are my feed costs? What are my space costs? Am I long or short on space? Do I have enough barns? So every producer has to really evaluate that separately, depending on the constraints or the push and pulls, to really understand how that works. But from a premix standpoint, this is where, when a lot of people bid out premixes, they do it on a quarterly basis. And so when we look at the copper sources in premixes, that if I had a crystal ball, maybe I would have bid out split my VTM out to trace minerals and would have held off of bidding, or maybe I would have just done open market potentially on my trace minerals, because I know it's a really market high, right, for copper, for instance. And so those are things to consider. But when you look at that variability on market prices and that market high, it may not look huge in your formulation costs because my premix may have changed $5 a ton or something because of that change in cost. But you add that up and you're a Tyson's or a Smithfield and you're feeding billions of birds or millions of pigs, and that fluctuation and not understanding markets can be just as, maybe not as costly as corn or soybean meal, but it is something to watch and play on those markets. So as a nutritionist formulation, I can't control the copper cost, but I can evaluate it from at least that growth promotion standpoint aspect, but also, comparing it to maybe other feed additives that may be cheaper. But it's not really like when we looking at an energy basis, and we always put everything back on a corn basis. Copper is copper. So to me, from a formulation perspective, I just have to eat that cost in the premix. But then do I evaluate what I'm going to do in my summertime or my late finisher or grower rations if I'm really needing that extra weight? And so that's what comes into play a lot when I look at formulation and copper price. And that's if I'm as attuned to that, right? And a lot of times I'm not sure we always look at the micro ingredients in our formulations as true cost drivers. And we kind of sometimes implement things and ride the wave because the risk of that value, that consistent performance that we know we get from that copper response in the late nursery, early grower, is essential. So it is not maybe something that we always evaluate from that perspective, but it's something to be considered.
Yeah. And also, I think another important aspect is the dosage of this product. They are not as great as the others. We don't really have a alternative supplement of this copper, right? You do need copper one way or another.
Yeah, and you can't just feed them a copper wire. That doesn't really work. No. But when you look at that, that's where tribasic copper chloride has received such popularity, especially I think in the monogastric side, who are using more of the pharmacological levels, is the fact that you get more copper per pound of product than you do with a copper sulfate. And the bioavailability is better than like a copper carbonate. And those types of things play a role. So when I'm looking at freight, if I'm shipping this in from, a lot of copper is not mined here in the US, so it's coming international anyways. There are some copper mines here in the US, but not like international supply. So we're most likely, importing that. So when we look at pricing on importation, we look at freight to bring it in from the ports, all of that plays a role. So the higher concentrated product does get that value beyond market price. So when I look at adding all those extra costs, tribasic copper chloride is one of those at the top of my list because of the concentration and the bioavailability. And then, we get into nutrition on premixes. What's really great with tribasic copper chloride is it doesn't impact my vitamins as bad. And we have a lot of producers in the swine industry still retaining premixes for 30 to 60 days. So when I add my premixes, and if I'm making a VTM or my vitamins are with my trace minerals, I need to be cautious on that as well in formulation of what I pick. So there's a lot that goes into it. And then the other layer is, we don't like to talk about sustainability, but if we work for a large corporation, these little things can add to our sustainability story. And that's becoming more important to have that story, But ultimately, there's a lot of other layers of value of looking at a tribasic copper chloride product, from freight and all the shipping costs, just because of that higher concentration.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
All right. Related to what Dr. Bradley said, how does the logistic of sourcing copper from China to United States work?
Mm, Copper is a high price product, so percentage-wise, the freight is not considered a major factor in pricing. But that not until early this year. So the ocean freight probably tripled compared to the same time last year. We used to pay $3,500 for each container, and nowadays, if we are lucky, we probably can get one for $8,000. So that alone, that's 6,000 or 5.5 grand difference per container. That's a huge difference, especially in animal feed industry. So that's also why we are seeing a surge of interest in copper in this market, because the way it works is unlike amino acid, which is constantly demanded by all the farmers. Mm-hmm. For copper, right, you can buy one truckload and then never think about that for 3 to 4 months, depends on the scale of your operation. So most of the customers, they would do that. They buy a truckload, they buy enough to keep them going for 3 to 4 months, and then not to think about that until they really need it again. Which also means, the seller, the distributor of this product, when they procure from the manufacturer and they saw this surge in ocean freight, they would just hold and wait, saying, okay, let's wait and observe what's happening with the ocean freight. Maybe it's coming down in a couple of months, and then I'll ship more to offset the gap. And it's a very common mentality for smaller ingredients in animal acid, because it's for soybean meal, for corn, for DDGS and amino acid, you cannot speculate. If you want to be in the business, you have to have inventory, like 100% constantly. Whenever you got a phone call, you make sure you have an inventory to support. But it's the quite opposite for copper resource. You can speculate. That means if you are able to take a position. If you think the market is long, and then you just holding the inventory. If you think the market is short, you just not touching that for a while. So I think that's what happens since the beginning of the year. The copper price is surging, and correlates with the surge of the ocean freight as well. So if you think of these two together as a sensible distributor, you will not touch that for a good 2 months. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the market. And no one's been importing that due to the high cost plus high freight. And then now here we are, everyone's asking me, would you have anything available in the next 2 weeks? I don't believe anyone does. So that's how it's impacting, the ocean freight is impacting this product. It's not impacting as much as amino acid or other low margin product, but it does. When we have a surge in ocean freight like this year, it does.
What is driving the surge this year? Because obviously COVID and things drove the surge of things and backlog of orders and stuff. What is it? The wars? Is it conflict or something that's causing this increase in freight?
I think the problem for our era is everything's so transparent. Whatever happens on the other side of the earth, we will see that on the news overnight, and we worry too much. So I think it all started with Red Sea, the attack on the vessels in Red Sea last November, and because of that, the steamship line carriers, they have to put on more vessels in order to keep the frequency of arrivals in Europe, because they have to detour all the way to the Africa in order to reach European instead of cutting through the canal. And as a result, you have less vessel available for shipping to America. And one thing lead to another. May, June, and July, South America, they are expecting a surge of the tariff for electric cars, and which is pushing the electric car manufacturers. They ship everything they can to Brazil in order to get rid of the tariff. I think the deadline was August 15th. So which is taking a chunk of the container supply. And as a result, we're ending up with no containers to ship to America and Canada. And now that thing is done, right? The Brazil thing is done. But now we are talking about early Christmas shopping for Walmart and the Targets. So that's why the surge of the ocean freight is just rippled over the ripple and ending up to where we are now.
Well, that's cool. And I was going to say, it's not because everybody's building container homes yet.
No.
Wow. Before we go, Louis, I always have been forgetting the last couple times. I turn the table and let our guest ask us any question they may have.
Oh, well, speaking of copper, can I ask us any question? Just not limited to copper, animal nutrition. Yeah. Okay. So recently, I've heard there's a trend of the formulation change in swine and poultry to use less because of the decline of the soybean meal, and there's a incentive to use more soybean rather than other amino acid, other ingredients. Do you think that's something sustaining, or do you think that's just temporary? And
that is a good question, and that was a key topic at Iowa Swine Day. Unfortunately, I didn't get to the pre-symposium, but I have been keeping up with soybean meal. And I would say at the beginning of this year, end of last year, a huge fluctuation in companies that utilize my services to talk about the animal nutrition market. There's a lot of people interested in soy products, different things, and is there market potential for it? And when we look at that, we've done tons of research out there on low crude protein diets. We know the values of low crude protein diets for young pigs, young chickens, from sustainability, emissions, all of that. And we forget about a lot of that data done in Europe on that. But what's unique here in the US perspective, and especially the swine industry, is that Dr. Dean Boyd's work and then David Rosario's work and Laura Greiner and all of them have looked at the ability of feeding more soybean meal to PRRS positive pigs. And so they're seeing those advantages. So when we look at the health aspect, obviously not all of our pigs or even our birds are health challenged. But when we look at the soybean meal cost, it has stayed pretty relatively low. So it's really cost effective when I look at what I'm paying, even for my customers with a non-GMO soybean meal, it's still quite a bit lower than it was 1-2 years ago. And so when I look at my synthetic amino acid needs, I'm actually over formulated on the majority of my amino acids. I still can pull in some lysine, some threonine, maybe some methionine. Birds definitely probably methionine. But when we think about that on the nursery pig, we're going to run that higher crude protein diet because it's cheaper than bringing in isoleucine or tryptophan if we look at the market differential between that. So it's everything that goes into that play. But I also caution you to say, well, it's PRRS positive flows, and that's really important, where in the summer months we're not seeing that as much, but we still have this E. coli issue. And so when we have those issues, having too much crude protein and having hindgut fermentation of protein is actually detrimental and can cause that E. coli to fester or rise. And copper and feeding higher copper levels late nursery is one of the ways that we combat that as well. So I think it's always an ebb and flow, and it's whatever the cool kids are doing research on and what's working today. But I think that popular opinion has only played a role because soybean meal markets have been so cheap. There's plenty of soybean meal out there because the oil's being used for biodiesel, and that really helps keep it low. I have not seen the USDA estimates on soybeans this year yet, but we already know that they didn't project or predict how much corn we have on the ground, and so it will really tell that coming into the fall what that looks like. But then we have to also look at Brazil, and that's something I can't comment on today because I'm not quite sure what their harvest was this summer on soybeans, to know that full dynamic. But a lot of that goes in, and then China has not been buying a lot of our soybean meal like in the past, so it's been a cheaper commodity or protein source for the US producer the last year than traditionally. So I think it's just a phase. But when we look at precision nutrition, we put sustainability in there, we try to optimize things, and the markets change. I think, the tide will turn and you'll see more synthetic amino acids being used. But today, based on the cost matrix, they're not pulling in as heavily as they used to in my diets for both
Are you
swine.
able to quantify that?
Sorry, what was that?
Are you able to quantify that? Like, what kind of to what extent are we talking about percentage wise? How this may impact this market?
Well, I would say probably my threonines, probably in the diets I've ran, probably down about 50%.
50%.
Of what it was pulling in a year ago. And then thus it's kicked isoleucine out in valine, except, I haven't ran any sow rations on the valine part. And so at least on my nursery diets, that's down. So when we look at the nursery pig, that's 25 pounds of the feed. And once you started getting more in that late nursery growers, some of those other lower essentials would drop out, right, of formulation anyways. But it's even pulling on some of that threonine valine where it might have been tight if we're pushing our lysine up to 10 pounds and 10 to 12, depending on what your risk level is on that. And I'm saying my lysines, 6 to 7. So that's a 30 to 40%, lower. So because I'm pulling in less lysine, I'm most likely pulling less of those following amino acids as well. So that's just in some of the basic formulation I've done recently, but I don't formulate my diets every day either. But definitely my soybean meal cost is down. My feed costs are down. Livability and production's up with my customers through some of the changes we made. So they're very happy with the nutritional decisions that we've done. But
okay, thank you. That's very valuable.
Well, I do have one last fun question for you, Louis. We're obviously talking about chicken or pork. Which one, chicken or pork? Your favorite food?
Pork.
Pork. Which cut of pork then?
The delicious ones.
Well, thank you so much for being on and talking about copper markets. And I know we'll have you back to talk about amino acid markets.
Thank you for having me.